So we're going to launch right in to the questions for Simone and Mesmin. And the first one is, the theme of this convening is visions for practice responsive research. What does this mean to you? And who or what do you see your research responding to? We'll start with Mesmin this time.
Okay, I got my mute going. Yeah, I think that's an important broad question to start with. For me, being responsive in our work is usually pretty literal. Like we try to be responsive to the needs of our partners, of our research partners. We do a lot of work with different schools and different school districts, and try as much as possible to make sure the projects are developed in response to what we learn is happening and that they need in those schools, which is almost always reflects the experience of the students more directly than if we weren't. And it's usually reflective of something bigger going on in the world. There's a few different, kind of, especially as a social psychologist running experiments, there's sort of like a continuum of how responsive the work can be. And in different projects, we've taken different approaches. So the Neuro work that Amy was talking about has been great. It's been such a privilege to have this structure and this office to facilitate deep partnership. And as she was saying, basically the project develops out of the interests that initially came from the district and from the schools. And then sort of we were brought on with our interest aligned with what they said was happening, what they needed, that happened to line up really well. And then we have this sort of guidance on moving things forward in conjunction with each other. What are the first steps we're going to take? How are we going to approach this? Is all sort of very collaborative all the way through, which has been really great. And I think having that structure has been a huge part of making that happen. Other work that we've done that hasn't had that, didn't start with that kind of structure, has been sort of starting partnerships with different schools individually, whether it's through relationships with colleagues who connect me to other schools, or just people through prior work that connect to particular schools. And a lot of that has really developed nicely. Over the years, I've kind of drilled down on a couple of those partnerships in schools to invest more in, because it's hard to have so many and really have them be deep partnerships. And sometimes, some of the initial projects they were always things the school was interested in, but they were things that we knew we wanted to do going in. Like, they happened to care a lot about post-secondary trajectories, and we were doing things around goals and mentoring and identity, which is great. But as the partnership has gone on with the school I'm thinking about in Chicago in particular, what we're doing now is much more responsive to, obviously, a range of things that they're facing in this current moment. And they've been much more open to and pushed much more for us to engage with students around how they're thinking about their race and ethnicity in the current environment with heightened attention to racial equity, and just taking a step back and doing focus groups around these different topics. So that's been a chance to be much more responsive than just kind of our initial experimental approach that we went in from the start. Yeah, I mean, there's also kind of some partnerships also that we sort of jump in on, where other research collaborators have the deeper relationship with the partner, and we kind of become more of a consultant side of things. So there's a whole continuum, and I find it all to work pretty well.
Great. Thanks, Mesmin. I'm going to call something out that you talked about after we hear from Simone, because I have a feeling she's going to further strengthen the point that I want to make. So go ahead, Simone.
What if I don't, Amy?
You will. I know you will.
I don't know. So this is a really great and broad question. I would say, and I'm really new to this space. Like, I haven't done these kinds of things outside of the infrastructure of what we have at Northwestern, and I don't think I would, honestly, because I think it's just too much to manage, and I don't know enough about, like, I've been trained by this partnership, and so my knowledge about how these things work is just very practical and on the ground, like whatever I've learned on the ground from doing this through Northwestern's office that Amy directs. But I would say for me, what it's responding to is kind of needs that the district or school agrees with me are an issue, right? So just to be clear, like, as a sociologist, or like in my thinking, I could think that there are problems that the district does not agree are problems. And I think that's kind of for me, the starting space is like, for this kind of work, we need to agree on an identified issue space that we're working on. And it needs to be sort of mutually beneficial. And when I say mutually beneficial, I think for me, there has to be like a really continued motive for me to keep working on it that's intellectual. And I think for their side, they need to feel like they're really going to get something out of whatever answers I can provide. So I think that mutual beneficiality is a really important piece in terms of keeping it going, because there's drudge work in this, just like with any research, and it can get hard and challenging. And I think they're really, both sides have to have a lot of buy-in, I think, to keep this going. Amy, did I cue what you wanted to point out?
Yes, you did.
Okay,
And Mesmin, of course, as well. And I think that one of the things that in doing this RPP work and really thinking about how we bring together these types of projects that really focus on the district priorities, but are very well aligned to what our scholars are interested in researching, right? And bringing along students in that as well, is really working to create these enduring relationships, right? Like I think about Mesmin's work in Chicago, because we have an RPP with Chicago with CPS as well. And I think what's so special about some of the work that he's done there is that the partners that he has in CPS can now come to him and say, hey, we've been working on these projects, but can we look at this too? Or could we think about another project here that's aligned to what we were doing in this one, but maybe further, goes a little further on this one particular issue. And that's really what we're seeking in our RPP work at Northwestern, is these enduring relationships between scholars and practitioners.